Let's bring in Wedbush Securities analyst James Hardiman. Did you revise numbers over the weekend? Again, James, as it becomes clear how that this may be lasting a little longer than we thought in terms of the cruise industry?
We brought our numbers down substantially last year, even before those announcements were made Friday afternoon. I think those announcements were obviously historical. They were unprecedented. They were hugely impactful. But I think they were ultimately inevitable going back some time now. So
what does the future look like? How do you see it playing out in terms of financing, in terms of business coming back, in terms of whether these companies actually survive and how much would be needed, how much help is going to be necessary for these companies to survive? And it's a big. I didn't realize how much it does add to the leisure industry in a big way in around the world. Really, it's a huge industry. Is it coming back?
I mean, it's the million-dollar question, and in many instances, the multi-billion-dollar question. I still talk to people that look at this and say, well, in a few months, hopefully things will be back to normal. I think that's a fantasy. I think eventually people will go back to work. They'll go back to school, within months here. But if I think about all of the activities that constitute normality, I think the cruise industry is last in terms of what's going to be even, call it 75% of normal. I think you're looking at least a year out. Now, the good news is these companies are extremely well capitalized. And I think they have, by the math that we do, anywhere from $1.5 billion to $3-4+ billion of sort of dry powder in the form of revolving credit facilities. The math is obviously difficult to do based on the various scenarios. I think they have at least a year of dry powder available to them, probably more like 1 to 2 years. But I do think it's going to be a long time before we return to normal.
James, the people who think that we are returning to normal, who you talk to, do they all happen to work in the cruise industry?
Well, I think even amongst cruise industry participants, that reality is slowly dawning on people. And I think the cruise companies in particular, the management teams there, are doing everything that they can to preserve capital at this point. That's the name of the game. They all did the right thing in terms of suspending cruise ships on Friday. It may have been a little bit late. But nonetheless, I think you've seen a number of steps put into place. Both Norwegian and Royal increased their revolvers by upwards of $500 million last week. I think you're going to see more moves like that as we move forward.
Because it's purely leisure. The airline industry, that would need a bailout. There's just no way around it. The cruise industry, you'd have to argue whether you bail out a leisure. And luckily, as you say, James, they're pretty well capitalized. And, I guess their fixed costs wouldn't be quite as much either because nobody's sailing right now, James, right? So.
Correct. And I think that's underappreciated. The fact that it's explicit now that these cruises are not going to be setting sail anytime soon, that really does allow them to scale back on the cost side of things. It probably doesn't hurt either that the president over the weekend and even on Friday, there's this embrace of the cruise industry to some degree. What that looks like is anybody's guess.
James, just to understand, what would be the run rate? Meaning, if you had to do a terminal value on zero demand for, call it 12 months, and you didn't operate the boats at all, the ships, what would happen?
It's a tough question, and it's a question that I think everybody is trying to do that math. I think first up is Carnival, who's actually going to report earnings next week, the 25th, so maybe the week after. Is that next week? Either way, that is going to be the million-dollar question for these companies. What is their staying power? Again, I think they can probably last for a year to two.
Are they going to report earnings?
But a lot of that depends.
Are they going to report earnings?
I would think so.
They will.
I would hope
so. It'll still be a plus number. Okay. All right.
Is the earnings going to be positive?
Losses, yeah.
Are they going to report earnings? You said they're going to report. Are they going to report earnings, or it's unclear?
They're going to report
something.
Their first quarter, which ended in February, they'll probably make money.
Okay.
But I think the guidance
might be the last
near term is probably going to be for negative earnings.
James,
exactly.
you keep painting them all with one brush. Does anybody stand out amongst the others as being particularly well capitalized or particularly poorly capitalized?
You know, certainly if you look at Norwegian, they're the smallest. They have the smallest balance sheet. They have, from a leverage standpoint, the most leverage. So that's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is Carnival, who is in fact the biggest, has been hardest hit from a brand perspective, right? It's their Princess brand that had the very specific outbreaks of coronavirus on 2 of their ships. So I think as people think about booking far into the future, I've got to think that Princess is going to have an impairment from a long-term perspective.